It is 26 degrees on a February night in Wilmington, Delaware, and in a shelter run by Family Promise, a mother is packing her kids' backpacks for school out of a single shared dresser drawer, because a family in transitional shelter doesn't get more than that. Across town, on a lot that used to be vacant, a house with walls nearly 2 feet thick is almost finished. Framed in post and beam timber, packed edge to edge with straw, and coated in a smooth lime plaster that still smells faintly like a barn. When a family moves in this summer, their electric bill is projected to run around $10 a month. Their mortgage will run $300 to $400, and the material holding the winter out of their walls is something most people have only ever seen bundled up and left to rot in a field. To understand how straw ended up as a wall, you have to go back over a century to the Nebraska sandhills in the 1890s, where homesteaders arriving under the Kincaid Act found almost no trees and almost no stone, but an ocean of grass. The invention that made straw bale building possible wasn't a person, it was a machine. The mechanical hay baler, which had spread across American farms by the 1890s and, for the first time, could compress loose straw into a block dense enough to stack like a brick. Around 1896 or 1897, somebody in the Sandhills built the first documented straw bale structure in the country, a schoolhouse. It wasn't plastered, cows ate it. That single, almost comic failure taught every builder who came after it the one rule that still governs the entire technique: seal the bale or lose the bale. Between 1896 and 1945, an estimated 70 straw bale buildings went up across that same stretch of Nebraska. Houses, churches, grocery stores, a handful of which are still standing and still lived in more than a century later. Nobody owns the idea. There was no company, no patent, no single name attached to it. It was farmers solving a supply problem with the only crop they had too much of. So what does it actually feel like to live behind walls that thick? The first thing people notice isn't visual, it's acoustic. A straw bale wall assembly, plastered on both faces, swallows outside noise the way a recording studio does. Traffic, sirens, next-door arguments, all of it gets absorbed instead of transmitted. The second thing is temperature. Because the bales function as continuous insulation, with none of the thermal gaps a stick-framed wall has between studs, straw bale homes tend to hold a stable indoor temperature almost regardless of what's happening outside, which is exactly how a Delaware family ends up with a projected $10 electric bill in a house with no gas hookup at all. Then come the quirks nobody mentions in the brochure. The window and door openings, cut straight through 2 feet of packed straw, leave deep, cave-like sills wide enough to sit in, and residents in other straw bale homes routinely turn them into reading nooks or plant shelves because the house basically hands you free furniture. The curved, hand-troweled plaster walls mean nothing hangs quite the way it would on drywall. A picture frame nail goes in fine, but a heavy floating shelf needs a very different kind of anchor, and more than one new resident has learned that the hard way. Wi-Fi routers, oddly, struggle in these houses too. 2 feet of dense organic material blocks a signal about as well as it blocks sound, so multiple straw bale households report needing a repeater in the back room. And there's a real, unglamorous complication that rarely makes the feature story. In most of these self-help programs, moving in isn't just a matter of a lease signing. Insurance and mortgage underwriting for an unconventional material can add weeks or months onto a timeline that a family already living in a shelter can feel every single day of. For some families, that's the hardest part of the whole process, the waiting. For others, the process itself is the best part, because in several of these programs, the future homeowner doesn't just receive a straw bale house, they build it. Community Rebuilds, a non-profit that's been running self-help straw bale construction in Moab, Utah since 2010, requires homeowners to put in roughly 20 hours a week of physical labor on their own house in exchange for a lower final cost. For someone stable enough to handle the workload, hammering their own walls into place is described as deeply restorative. For someone already worn down by years of housing instability, that same 20-hour weekly commitment can be one more thing they don't have room for. A typical day on one of these builds moves in a rhythm that has nothing to do with a typical construction site. Mornings start with a safety briefing and a materials check, because straw bales, unlike lumber, vary slightly bale to bale and have to be inspected and trimmed by hand. Midday is when most of the physical labor happens, stacking bales like oversized bricks, pinning them with rebar or bamboo, compressing courses with come-alongs. Afternoons slow down for the plastering crews, applying lime coat by coat, a process that can't be rushed because each layer needs time to cure. By evening, volunteers and future homeowners alike are covered in a fine white dust that doesn't fully wash out until the second shower. And at night, once a section of the home is finished and occupied, residents describe a stillness that has nothing to do with the neighborhood outside and everything to do with 2 feet of solid, breathing wall between them and the world. Community Rebuild's own numbers back up why families put themselves through that labor. Their finished homes run about $70 a square foot, roughly half the standard construction cost in a tourist-driven housing market like Moab's, and owners report saving around 85% on monthly utility bills for the life of the home. The organization's founder has been blunt about why this matters, describing families doubled up in trailers and families losing custody of their own children simply because they didn't have stable housing. A parent who goes from a shared shelter drawer to owning a $70 a square foot home with an 85% utility discount shows up different to a landlord background check, different to a school enrollment office, different to a custody hearing. So, if a building method this cheap and this effective has existed for over 100 years, why are there still only about 1,100 straw bale buildings in the entire United States? The obstacle isn't the material. Straw bale wall assemblies have been tested under a standard fire exposure protocol, ASTME 119, and held up against temperatures around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit for up to 2 hours without losing structural integrity. A fire performance that beats a lot of conventional stick-framed construction. No termite species actually subsists on straw, which means these homes are, if anything, less termite-prone than a standard wood-framed house. The real obstacle is money, specifically other people's money. A meaningful number of insurance companies still won't write a standard fire policy on a home with straw in the walls, treating the material the way they would have in 1995, before 3 decades of fire testing existed. Mortgage lenders hesitate for a related reason. They worry about resale value and appraisals on a construction type they rarely see, which means financing a straw bale build can still take longer and require more paperwork than financing an identical square footage in vinyl siding. That is the quiet, unglamorous choke point holding back 130-year-old technology that keeps testing better than the thing it's competing against. And yet, the idea kept spreading anyway, one small independent project at a time, with no company or headquarters behind any of it. In Wilmington, Delaware, the project belongs to a University of Delaware freshman named Brennan Stark, who founded a nonprofit called Y Innovations and raised more than $55,000 to build the first urban straw bale home in the state's history for a family selected through the shelter network Family Promise. There are about 1,100 straw buildings in the United States, with at least one in 47 of the 50 states, Stark has said, which means his Wilmington build alone measurably moves that national count. In Soquel, California, 3 local contractors, Michelle Landegger, Micah Posner, and Keita Glass, formed a group called Just Places and partnered with the nonprofit People First of Santa Cruz County to replace 6 red-tagged, uninhabitable cabins on Mount Calvary Lutheran Church's property with a straw bale village built specifically for people transitioning out of homelessness, a roughly $300,000 project with a second 10-unit apartment phase already planned. And in Montana, the nonprofit Red Feather Development Group partnered with the Northern Cheyenne Nation in 2001 and again in 2003 to build straw bale homes for tribal members facing some of the worst rural housing shortages in the country. Different states, different decades, no shared parent organization, and every single one of them landed on the same stack of dense plastered grass. So what do the people closest to these projects actually say once the cameras and the volunteers go home? Caseworkers and program staff who've watched families move through self-help straw bale programs tend to circle back to the same 3 things. The first is the mortgage number itself. $300 or $400 a month is, for a family coming out of a shelter, often the first housing cost they've seen in years that doesn't feel like a trap closing. The second is the labor. Even for families who found the 20-hour weekly build commitment exhausting, staff report that finishing a wall with your own hands changes how a person talks about the house afterward. It stops being something given to them and starts being something they made. The third is smaller and stranger, the thickness of the walls themselves. More than one program has noted that formerly unhoused residents specifically mention, unprompted, how much safer 2 feet of solid wall feels than the walls of a typical shelter room or apartment. A detail that says less about construction technique and more about what years of thin walls and thin doors actually costs a person's nervous system. It's also worth challenging who you probably picture needing a program like this. The image most people default to is a young single adult. The data says otherwise. About half of all homeless Americans over the age of 55 represent the fastest growing share of the homeless population nationally. Widows who lost half a household's income the day a spouse died, retirees priced out of apartments they'd rented for 20 years, workers whose bodies gave out before any pension could catch them. These are exactly the people Community Rebuild's own founder described watching lose custody of grandchildren and double up in trailers, and they are frequently the hardest population to house through a conventional shelter system built around younger, single, faster-moving residents. A slow, hands-on, 20-week straw bale build isn't a fit for everyone in that group, but for the ones with the time and the physical ability, it offers something a shelter bed simply can't: an address with their name on the deed. It would be dishonest to leave out the real criticism, and some of it holds up. Straw bale construction is genuinely slower and more labor-intensive than conventional framing, which means every home built this way depends on donated land, grant funding, and hundreds of hours of often volunteer labor, rather than a repeatable, scalable industrial process. Critics reasonably ask whether a method this dependent on goodwill can ever house more than a rounding error of the people who need it. And the insurance and financing discrimination isn't a minor footnote. It's a real, ongoing tax on every family that chooses this path, adding cost and delay that a family in crisis can least afford. But set those downsides against the actual testing data. A 2-hour fire rating at temperatures beating a lot of standard construction, lower termite risk than a stick-built house, utility bills cut by roughly 85% for the life of the building, and a per square foot cost, in Moab's numbers, at half the market rate. A technology insurer's still price like it's 1995 is, by every independent test since then, safer than the thing they're pricing it against. On a Sunday afternoon, none of that reads like a policy fight. It reads like a family in Soquel, California, hanging laundry on a line strung between a plastered straw bale wall and a fence post, arguing cheerfully about whose turn it is to water the tomatoes planted along the church's old cabin foundation. One caseworker, describing what these homes actually give a family, didn't mention the walls or the savings at all. She said it gave them a door their kids stopped being afraid would disappear. So picture that mother in Wilmington again, packing school bags out of a single shelter drawer, while, across town, a house with 2-foot-thick walls sits almost finished and waiting for a family like hers. That house has no granite, countertops, and no second bathroom. What it has is a $10 electric bill, a $300 mortgage, and walls built from a crop that, on most farms in America, still just gets baled, left in a field, and eventually burned. Somewhere between a Nebraska cow eating an unplastered schoolhouse in 1897 and a 19-year-old college freshman raising $55,000 in Delaware, this country quietly figured out that the cheapest, safest wall available was never lumber or brick or concrete at all. It was leftover grass, stacked 2 feet deep, sealed against the weather, and given enough time to become somebody's home. If you want more true stories about ordinary people quietly solving problems the country's been stuck on for decades, subscribe, because next week we're meeting the Toronto carpenter who spent his own money building tiny insulated shelters and placing them in city parks in the middle of the night until the city took him to court for it, and whose side the public took genuinely surprised us.